Happy New Year. I hope you've had good holidays and great first month of the year. And I cannot wait to start working with you more in the following sessions. And for today, we have prepared for you, I hope, very nice workshop together with Mihai Constantinescu. Mihai is the Director of Expertise for the Romanian Diplomatic Institute here in Romania. He is he's one of my colleagues and very good friends, and we've known each other for a lot of years. So I'm very happy that he accepted the invitation to come and talk with you guys. Mihai is working a lot on the on the topics of democratization, and not only, he's also a graduate from the Central European University in Vienna, and is also doing right now his PhD. But I will let him tell you more about himself and about what the topic will be today. And Mihai, I will leave it to you from here. Feel free to ask Mihai as many questions as possible, and I really hope that this is going to be a very useful topic and session for all of us.
Okay, so thank you so much, Patricia. So as my colleague Patricia said, my name is Mihai Constantinescu. I'm currently in charge for the expert analysis department of the Romanian Diplomatic Institute. So hello, everyone. Welcome here. I will start telling you a few words about the Romanian Diplomatic Institute, since some of you are outside Romania, some of you maybe are not that familiar with our activities. So I will start with that, then I will continue with maybe several questions and topics to discuss, and I will have also a brief, not necessarily presentation, but a brief talk related to the status of diplomacy, how diplomacy is perceived at the international level right now, which are the most interesting developments related to diplomacy, and which are the challenges that we are facing right now. So we are I'm part of the Romanian Diplomatic Institute, which is the training, let's say, unit of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We are in charge for training diplomats, and not necessarily just diplomats. We are also able to train different parts of our public, central and local administration. We are also delivering trainings for non-necessarily non-public servants, people from NGOs, media, journalists, and so on. To a certain extent, we are also able to deliver trainings for external diplomats, but this is another topic. So one of our main activity, apart from being trainers for diplomats and crafting interesting courses and classes for them, is to research different topics. So my department is divided in several compartments. Some of them are focused on Asian studies, post-Soviet studies, EU studies, US studies, and myself, I am also responsible for the African side of our research interests. So if you have questions, I'm here for you. If you would like to see our activity, you can check our social media accounts, our idr.ro website, our Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and we'll try to launch our YouTube channel as soon as possible. I will start telling more that I will present part of our research at the Romanian Diplomatic Institute, which is covered innovative, let's say, innovative diplomacy, the trends that we should follow in the field. So recently, I read a very interesting article from the Foreign Service Journal, which is for many of you, maybe it's unknown, but the Foreign Service Journal, for me, it's very important. It's part of it's published by the former or retired or maybe active US diplomats, and each month they are publishing an issue. This issue was very important for me and for us as a researcher, because they try to tackle the idea of the future of diplomacy during the Trump 2.0 administration. So the former US ambassador Tom Shannon, explained that the diplomats in general, and especially the US diplomats, they should focus more on the non-partisan side of diplomacy. So this would be a trend that we should follow. In general, diplomacy has a tendency to be involved in different political games, which in general are bad for the practice of diplomacy. So for the purpose of diplomacy and for its future, for its healthy future, needs to stay away from these tactics and this tactic of being involved in politics, and mostly be focused on how diplomats can help the decision makers to take proper approaches towards the global affairs. So this is one of the trends, but in general, we should think about diplomacy as a concept that it's around us, that is present in, let's say, every aspect of our life, not necessarily since forever, but since from ancient times. So during the times, diplomacy has changed a lot. At the beginning, think about the Greek and the Roman side of diplomacy, when they send different type of counselors in different territories to link relations and to handle the trade part of the relation and also the political side. But nowadays, this is totally different, because diplomacy and diplomats in general, they are facing numerous challenges, especially from the development of technologies and also from the general audience. Because let's be honest, diplomacy has a bad reputation in many parts of our daily life. In general, we have the tendency to think about diplomats as people that are nicely dressed and they are going to nice reception and drink champagne and discuss about what should we do, what's next for us and for our countries and for our cooperation, our bilateral and multilateral cooperation. But in reality, it's a bit different, especially, let's take the example of Adela and also my example and others' example, which are young people at the first stages of their career. When you enter into the diplomatic service, it's not that nice at the beginning as you imagine it would be. You are mostly dealing with different type of bureaucracy and phone calls and writing emails and so on. So this idea should be tackled, because it's mostly dangerous for the general perception of the diplomats. So you have on the one side, we have the general public that perceive diplomats as, let's say, useless or arrogant, but on the same time, the general audience needs diplomacy and diplomats to handle the international relations. So I will dive more into it. Diplomacy, it's in general losing its purpose. Its purpose is to craft and to link people, to link nations, and to link states and organizations. This type of approach is to link a state with an international organization and a state to another state. So this is the traditional way or traditional meaning of thinking about diplomacy. Other things are related to diplomacy is the communication side. Diplomacy in the recent past was responsible for transmitting, for delivering messages to the general public. So you are in the 90s, and most of your information are coming from diplomats, from embassies, from different institutions that are responsible for maintaining relations with other countries. Nowadays, it seems that a bit this practice is coming to an end, because as Condoleezza Rice and also Hillary Clinton mentioned a few years ago, where is a smartphone, a strong internet connection, and an individual, there would be a diplomat to a certain point, because the information is it's fastly translated and transferring to from another part to the other of the globe. This is be a problem per se, because attacking is let's say challenges the general meaning of diplomacy. When you have a bunch of people that are going to reception and they have no purpose in communicating and delivering proper messages to the general audience, then you have a problem. Because the general audience, let's say the public, will start to think, okay, do we really need diplomats, or we can do it by ourselves? So we enter into a very dangerous approach when they try to this rhetoric is trying to undermine the meaning and the purpose of a foreign service and of a foreign policy of a state or of an organization. This type of approach could be, let's say, tackled by focusing on maybe five different sides of the practice of diplomacy. The first side is retention. The second is digitalization. The third is the inclusiveness part of it. The fourth is the work environment of diplomacy and diplomats. And the fifth is related to the diversification of the diplomatic practice. These five steps of reform are needed to be implemented in order to increase the purpose and the scope of diplomacy. So I will start with the first one. I will start with the retention side and the educational side of diplomatic service, of a foreign service. One of the most recent studies related to that, not necessarily not related, but researching the retention side of the diplomatic practice, stated that 31% of the current US diplomats are thinking about going into private sector, not necessarily continuing their diplomatic career. And the main reason for doing that is not necessarily the political climate, is mostly related to their wages and their development perspectives, their personal development perspectives. In general, and it's not necessarily applicable for the US Foreign Service, it's also applicable for many Western MFAs and also for the Chinese one. People have the tendency to adhere to different jobs just because they have not necessarily more opportunities to develop themselves and to go to study and to have a family and so on. So this part of retention is also a problem here in Romania, where we have different selection processes, and we are still under another selection process because it's quite difficult to keep personnel inside MFAs. The opportunities are so you have a lot of opportunities as a young professional, not necessary to stay in an office, in an MFA, and to write emails to other people in other countries. You have opportunity to go to private sector where you have different opportunities. You have to grow. You have the opportunity to go to the NGO sector, or the opportunity to be an entrepreneur itself. So states such as US, France, Great Britain, China, and Germany, they realize that it's better to be focused more on the educational facilities of their diplomatic services. So diplomatic academies became more important in this side of retaining personnel. In this regard, there are two different approaches. So they start to craft massive trainings, very complex in time and in its nature. For instance, you have the Chinese example, where they have, in general, an entry training which lasts about 12 months, and also after 5 years you have to go to another training, which may last about 18 months. The other approach is the one used in general by the French Foreign Service and also to a certain extent by the British Foreign Service. They are trying to get people from the Ivy League schools, from Sciences Po, from Sorbonne, from Cambridge, Oxford, and so on. So they are overlook this part of complex training, of in-house training at the diplomatic academies, because they are quite sure the formal education of the future employees is quite decent, being taking into account their level of university of academia and university studies. So in terms of retention, you also have a problem with the opportunity of going to study. Recently, as far as I research, at U.S. Foreign Service introduced a special regulation that allows its employees to suspend their job, their post, and to pursue PhD programs, especially at least 4 years. Let's go a bit to the second the second step of crafting a diplomatic reform, which is related to the digital one and digitalization. Here I would like to make the distinction between the digital diplomacy and the digitalization of diplomacy. When you are thinking about the digital diplomacy, you should think about the way diplomats and MFAs are interacting with the digital world. Digitalization is mostly related to the way MFAs and individuals are, let's say, get advantage or use digital tools, or how digital tools are implemented within the diplomatic practice. So here, the digital diplomacy side is mostly focused on providing services to the citizens using digital tools, and also trying to immerse into the digital world by creating different media tools and different campaigns. So here I will start to talk about the idea of the virtual diplomacy, the idea of Hillary Clinton, which created this pattern, not necessarily this pattern, but this approach of enhancing the U.S. digital diplomacy, which was quite innovative at that time, and also introducing the idea of virtual embassy for a certain period, and I think it's also the case right now, especially in Iran. U.S. Design and develop the idea of virtual embassies. So it's not anymore necessary to have a physical building, to have a physical embassy in Iran. You can have a virtual embassy where different citizens, U.S. citizens, and not necessarily limited to U.S. citizens, could address and could solve or enrich the relations to U.S. service. And also the case is it's also the case for Syrian soil, or where U.S. had virtual diplomacy, virtual embassy for several years. Okay, going to the side of digitalization. Digitalization is mostly related to the idea of modularity. What exactly means this? Is the possibility and the ability of a diplomat to act as a diplomat also remotely, by using its laptop and its phone and its internet connection to deliver let's say to create. It's not necessary to create, but to extend its network and to handle the diplomatic and the bilateral, to handle the bilateral and multilateral relations. So the idea of modularity is related to the way a diplomatic service and diplomats in general are using digital tools. Also, in terms of digitalization, think about the idea of having tech diplomacy. So also the idea of being updated to the recent trends means that certain states like Denmark created tech diplomacy, the idea of tech diplomacy and tech embassies and tech ambassadors, these concepts. Nowadays, Denmark has its tech ambassador posted in Silicon Valley and also in Beijing. And this idea was quite nice during that period in 2017 when they opened the tech embassy in Silicon Valley, because it was also um, replicated by states like let's take Germany, as far as I know, and also Slovakia was involved in the process of creating tech diplomacy and tech ambassador, the post of the tech ambassador. What exactly means this? That you have the business sector that is involved into diplomatic, let's say diplomatic affairs, and is trying to attract more investors and to create more relations and to expand the network of its state by dealing with technologies and the digitalization of a certain part of public administration. I will go to the third part of I'll go to the third part of our reform. This 5-step reform is related to the inclusiveness part. This side is mostly is concerned in terms of how foreign services could be more inclusive, not necessarily in terms of gender, race, or religion, but also in terms of social opportunities. Think about countries, big countries like Brazil that started to implement recruitment centers, in different parts of the country in order to get and to facilitate the access of people coming from underdeveloped regions of Brazil to be able to attend the recruitment process of the Brazilian MFA. So implementing this type of inclusive policy, they realized that from 2018, half of their personnel that enter into the diplomatic service are coming from, let's say, difficult social backgrounds. Coming to a more, let's say, obvious side of inclusiveness, one of the most, let's say, one of the flagship MFAs in this regard is the French ministry, where they have basically gender equality in their diplomatic service. And also many states like Mexico, Germany, France, also US to a certain extent, have internal policies, inclusiveness, yes, policies related to inclusiveness. Also thinking about inclusive policies, you have a special representative within the US service that is mainly dealing with the policy, with inclusive policies. You have, if I pronounce correctly, Gina Weinstelli, which is I think is still in place, hopefully, and is dealing with the inclusive, let's say, inclusive policies of the US service. Okay, I'll go to the fourth step of our reform. It's related to the work environment. So one of the things that we should follow, and one of the trends that we may follow in the future, is related to the way MFAs are trying to create more friendly environment for their personnel. And this is mostly related to the idea of double feedback and increasing the involvement of human resources department within the MFA. The double feedback meaning you already know the idea of getting feedback from your supervisors and also being able to deliver feedback to your supervisor. And also the HR policies which are dealing with the work environment are trying to create more back office support for the employees and to be more tolerant with their desires in terms of having more vacation, more opportunities to have a family, and so on. And the fifth one is related. The fifth step in assessing the trends in diplomacy is related to the idea of diversifying the diplomatic practice and involving more stakeholders, and involving also what Anthony Blinken called middle-class diplomacy, to create a diplomacy that is crafted for different sides of our society, not necessarily for diplomats, exclusively for diplomats and for decision makers, but to create a diplomacy that is able to discuss with regular people, to go in different regions, to extend its presence in schools and high schools, universities, going to small cities, and so on. Nowadays, also in Romania, you don't have this type of approach. You don't see necessarily ambassador going to small cities or villages or counties in Romania or in other regions. This is not necessarily a regular practice. Mostly diplomatic practice is and diplomatic affairs are handled into the at the capital level. Also regarding the diversification of diplomacy, take into account the idea of including NGOs and let's give the example of Australia. Australia, in different environmental or climate change issues, is involving Greenpeace in diplomatic talks, and also is using Greenpeace to get a consultancy in terms how to handle the climate, and also their problem with the eastern part of Australia, where you have the Great Barrier of Corals. So this is in short what I would like to discuss and maybe to expand. There are many examples. I can expand it more on the digital side, how, for instance, different MFAs are creating social media campaigns, the examples of Australia, of Israel. We can also discuss the idea of adaptation versus adaptability, how diplomacy nowadays is adapting or more adopting different tools. Or we can also talk about the future, how you envision the future of diplomacy, let's say in 2040. Because diplomacy, as I stated at the beginning of my small presentation, is changing, and it's losing its meaning to a certain degree. It's quite difficult to have a proper definition for diplomacy, or for what is a diplomat. A diplomat could be an athlete, could be a musician, could be a painter, and diplomacy is also a process that could be handled by corporations, by regions, by cities, and so on. So if you have questions, I'm open to discuss. If you don't, I will continue with several examples. So feel free to jump in.
I feel like I really connect with that idea of everyone being a diplomat when you arrive in another country. I've always felt like I was a representative of America when I was abroad, teaching English or learning a language. And I always try and put my best foot forward to show the best parts of America, try and represent as a good version of what America can be.
It's kind of related to the US. It's a saying in the literature that there are a lot of American goods loved by people in Africa and Middle East, but not necessarily the American policies there. So being an individual able to connect with different type of people in different countries, for sure increases the diplomatic side of a country, and especially here at this example of the US. And what exactly do you think would be the future of diplomacy? I'm curious because I just discovered this, let's say, these steps that should be taken into account, but maybe you have other ideas.
I feel like there's a lot to be said for the physical presence of a person. I know that you were talking at the beginning about the digitalization bringing people closer together and potentially taking over a part of what diplomacy has been in the past. But I feel like the physical presence of a human body with another human body in another place is a really important aspect of the interpersonal communication. And I also feel that, I mean, the government interaction is never going to get fully taken over by just citizens of a country interacting. For sure, there's got to be high level interactions to merge policy and align values. But as far as the future goes, I feel like there is a lot of opportunity for person to person, citizen to citizen interaction and diplomacy going forward.
Let me tell you the story of Frank Buchmann. I think he was a US citizen, but I think at an early age he moved to the United Kingdom. Do you know Frank Buchmann? So I can tell more about him if you don't know.
Give me some background. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So Frank Buchmann was so have a neo-Protestant religion belief. He was born at the end of 19th century, and then he moved to the UK to pursue a career in academia. He was part of the Oxford group in the 20s, and he developed a very interesting approach. During the First World War and the Second World War, there was this idea of army of rearmament, or getting more arms, of getting more weapons in order to be prepared for the war. The crisis of people of different states, right? The crisis faced by different states, which were on the way to get more arms and to be more prepared and increase their armies. And Frank Buchmann during that time in the 20s and in the 30s came with the idea of moral rearmament. So he pledged for not necessarily arming states with weapons, but arming people with solid perception and moral values, let's say. What Frank Buchmann did, he wasn't a diplomat, was just an academic. In 1940s, he went to Switzerland and he discovered a very nice castle, the Caux Palace. Caux Palace it's a castle in Montreux, near to the Lake Geneva. And there he discovered that the castle was very bright and very famous in the future during the Belle Epoque, but started to be more as a shelter for different type of refugees. To a certain time it was a shelter for Jewish refugees. At the first stages of the war, was a shelter for U.S. refugees, U.S. soldiers that escaped from Italy, and so on. So in 1945, together with a local lawyer, they decided to rebuild, or to not necessarily rebuild, but to redesign the palace and to use the Caux Palace as an institution where people from different backgrounds could connect one to another. So he gathered a bunch of French guys and German guys and bring them together exactly after the end of the World War II, bring them together in Switzerland, in Caux, and help them to to reconnect by reconstructing the co-palace. So Frank Buchmann, as an academic, managed to be one of the first, let's say, initiators of Franco-Germanic reconciliation after the World War II. So this is one of the examples of a, let's say, normal individual, normal citizen that could enhance the diplomacy, not necessarily of a country, but I would say of a region, because after this meeting happened, they started to think about the broader European project, which now is called European Union. So it's just an example. So thoughts, opinions, suggestions, questions. I have other examples.
I like that example. I feel like it shows that a private citizen can still have big influence on, even outside of the government, they can have big influence on the international relations and potentially the future of public policy through the influence of people that would eventually go into it. And just being such a force in a situation that the governments can't ignore.
Yeah.
The situation you've created.
I will give you another example of a diplomatic side that is not necessarily quite present in the public sphere. The idea of using a space, a special location, as a diplomatic, let's say, not a diplomatic weapon, but as a diplomatic tool to show your force and your thoughts to your partner, to your counterpart. So in 2024, I think in March, President Xi Jinping came to Paris to visit Emmanuel Macron and to pay an official visit. And after doing their ceremonies at the Élysée Palace and so on, Macron decided to get President Xi to the Pyrenees, to the Tourmalet, let's say, village. For many of you, maybe Tourmalet is not necessarily a famous place. Maybe you are a winter sport fan or not, but Tourmalet is very famous for its, let's say, implications within the cycling world. Tourmalet is the most present, let's say, destination during the Tour de France. Tourmalet is the highest peak, is the highest summit that can be reached in general during the Tour de France. Additionally, Tourmalet has two different meanings. You have the normal French meaning Tourmalet, which means let's say a bad tour, and also you have the local dialect, the Gascon dialect. Means Tourmalet means a mountain, a broad mountain, or something like this. So if you think about this type of destination that is using during the diplomatic meeting, and the message that Emmanuel Macron tried to deliver to Xi Jinping, we can think about the idea of French, a strong state, a strong power in the world that is trying to get its way back to the highest level of the international politics, and they are using the most famous climbs of the Tour de France, Tourmalet. And Tour de France is one of the flagship sports events that is happening yearly in France. Another way of showing that you are still present at the international stage, not necessarily just through your hard power, but also through your soft power. And not the obvious French cultural things, but also through sport. And also Tourmalet was very important because was the destination of the young Emmanuel Macron that was visiting his grandparents. They had a small, let's say, a small house residence there, and he also tried to transmit the idea of getting closer in a specific in a special place. So I will invite you to my childhood house or region, and I will show you the greatness of our nation, the greatness of France. Okay. Questions?
I have a question, if I can jump in. So living from the example that you just gave us with Emmanuel Macron, and also thinking in terms of what is the future of diplomacy in, let's say, 20, 30 years from now on, what would you say will multilateral diplomacy still play such an important role as it plays today, or will states slowly go back to bilateral diplomacy?
I would say not necessarily from my opinion, from my subjective opinion, but also from a research that I managed to publish at the Diplomatic Institute. The bilateral diplomacy started to be more influent in terms, more not necessarily influent, but more valuable for states than multilateral diplomacy. Multilateral diplomacy is used by small states with less influence at the international stage. For instance, let's say Romania, where we are trying to focus more on international formats like the UN, NATO, let's say EU, and so on. But in reality, next to us, Greece, Poland, Italy, France, they are trying to create a network of bilateral partnerships with different countries from the Middle East, from Eastern Europe, so they are trying in terms to extend their influence, not necessarily through multilateral organization, but creating bilateral partnerships, because bilateral partnerships are more stable, they are easy to use. It's quite difficult to get consensus at the EU level or at the General Assembly at the UN, but it's easier to convince Greece. Let's take the example of a bilateral partnership between France and Greece. It's easier to convince Greece to act in your interest and to help you to extend your influence at the in the Mediterranean region when you are France. And also, this strategy was to a certain extent was replicated in Romania, but on a smaller level. The idea of creating the partnership between Bulgaria, Turkey, and Romania, this trilateral discussion, to have the trilateral discussion between Romania, Moldova, and Ukraine. But we are still lacking in terms of strategic partnerships. We have around 17 or 18 strategic partners, and mostly we are focused on the obvious one. I mean, the one with the US and the one with France, but not necessarily with smaller countries, let's say Moldova and so on. And we are still under process of creating new strategic partnerships, which a bit is it's a bit dangerous because all other states from the region did it earlier. So from my point of view, concluding, bilateral diplomacy is trending right now. So
we have some questions. So Andre, do you still want to ask a question? You had your hand raised, and then if not, Erekle is also. Then Erekle, do you still want to ask a question?
Yeah, thank you. So I have a question regarding what you have mentioned about the let's say the economic diplomacy, digitalization, digital diplomacy, and what we are seeing now regarding the AI and its developments, like recently as the DeepSeek just overturned the ChatGPT, and all these like the huge corporations and their prices went down. how do you see in the upcoming years, in the days, the AI as the part of the diplomatic, let's say, I don't know, diplomatic struggle, or can it, let's say, increase or like make it better or make some advantages when it comes to the diplomatic practice, or can it make it like more weak and disadvantage in terms of like a partnerships between the countries and the societies?
Okay, there are different, let's say, frameworks that we should approach. From a traditional point of view of diplomacy, AI, I don't think would have a big impact, because in general, diplomats are talking one to another directly, and is mostly traditional diplomacy is mostly based on people to people, heart to heart conversation. You are negotiating directly with your counterpart and so on. So AI maybe could help in the traditional part of diplomacy in, let's say, what is doing right now ChatGPT, let's say crafting different types of reports and using or using ChatGPT for analyzing data and so on, complex tasks that are necessarily let's say are handled by a bunch of people, not necessarily by a single soft in a certain and a decent amount of time. From a non-traditional part of view, I would say that we are going to a more corporate state diplomacy, seeing the state as a corporate, as a corporation, and transforming diplomacy mostly into a PR, or I'll say public relations department, or foreign relations department, not necessarily maintaining the traditional sense or traditional meaning of diplomacy. Because what is important, and what is important to know about diplomacy, having special rules, certain rules of acting and discussing and handling different type of conversations, is a specific side of diplomacy that help us to avoid useless arguments between different parts. You have a certain schedule, you have a certain way of talking, you have a certain protocol, you have this type of rules that is extremely useful when you are trying to transmit, to deliver messages to your counterparts. Regarding AI, I would say what exactly the economic diplomacy. I would say that, I will give the example of Romania. We don't have a proper economic diplomacy. We don't have this general idea of creating networks of entrepreneurs by using our diplomatic cooperation. In general, when president of a strong country is going to another country, he's going along with different businessmen, entrepreneurs, and so on. In smaller states like Romania, and I presume it's also the case in other states, president is not necessarily focused on getting local entrepreneurs and to help them to create and to establish proper connections with other local entrepreneurs on a certain country. Mostly small states are focused on creating partnerships, general partnerships that to a certain degree are followed by smaller agreements and are followed by small economic exchanges. In general, it's not necessarily the case for the US or bigger states, but in general, for the Eastern Europe, is quite the same thing for many of the states. So, coming to your question, yeah, AI and let's say the stock market and the advance of ChatGPT and so on, I presume diplomacy will have a role to play in terms of regulating the idea of AI, because as you already observed, AI's development is a bit under not necessary, it's out of control. So we don't know exactly what will happen in 20 years. We don't know exactly the impact of AI on the job market. We don't know the impact of AI on politics, on elections, on climate, and so on. We just see the direct, let's say the small effects, the direct effects that we are make our activities more efficient, but we don't have the idea, we don't have a clue what will happen in 20 years. So I believe the diplomats could help here to establish certain regulations or maybe to reach a global agreement or something like this on a multilateral framework.
Are there any more questions, dilemmas? Anything from you? You can also ask personal questions, you know, because I remember that one of you at the beginning when you were introducing yourselves, you were saying that you're interested in Mihai's pathway to becoming part of the diplomacy. So why not?
I think one of our colleagues, I believe Andre, or maybe I'm wrong, not is working with the external European External Action Service. So I can talk more about my experience working with them at the European Diplomatic Academy. If you are interested to, I can also discuss about my experience working with the International Organization for Migration. I don't know, maybe are certain aspects that are.
I think Robin, right?
Good.
Robin, you are working with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it wasn't me who mentioned it was Robin, but it would be interesting to hear more about the ES. Yeah.
Okay, so I believe for many of the European diplomats, yes, is to a certain degree, it's the Champions League. Is the highest level that you can reach in terms of diplomatic practice. You are representing the EU at the global level. So in 2023, I would say not in 20, in 22, the High Representative during that time, Josep Borrell, and some Spanish diplomats, Sanchez Amor, one of them, established the European Diplomatic Academy, an innovative project that aimed to create on a, let's say, on a regular base, to create a dense and very compact group of European, pan-European diplomats that are working and studying together for 9 months in Bruges, in Belgium, and then they will go back to their countries, and to a certain point they will have leading position at their MFAs, or they will come back to Brussels and they will handle European affairs globally, let's say. So I had the chance to be part of the first team that implemented the European Diplomatic Academy in 2023. During that time, the program was open for EU member states diplomats and also for non-EU member state diplomats, which was very important because diplomats from Moldova, Ukraine, Turkey, Macedonia, I believe, I remember, and Albania, they had the chance to have direct contact with their fellows from the European Union. They have the contact to get they have the opportunity to have direct contact with EU institution, and also they have the contact to get familiar with the EU procedures, taking into account that some of the above mentioned countries are in the process, the accession process. Regarding my work there, was especially not necessarily very fascinating in terms of task, but was very important in terms of feeling the environment, seeing the people working together with people such as Federica Mogherini, organizing events, and stay extremely close to the highest EU decision level. From this point of view, was extremely nice, the experience. but let's say from a more personal way was quite strange because mostly my tasks were quite boring, not necessarily because I was an entry level there, but because in general this is the activity of the EAS personnel, uh, creating organizing events, creating a lot of reports, briefings, minutes, concept notes, uh, mm, arranging contracts, sending emails, or let's say invitations, and so on. So from this side was extremely boring, but from a, let's say, professional point of view was quite nice to be there. I remember that during that time was the famous speech of Joseph Borrell when he claimed that Europe is a jungle and the rest of the world uh, is a is a jungle and the EU is a garden. So the famous speech that was uh, criticized by many, say, non-EU countries, especially by the global South countries. So it was quite nice to be in attendance, seeing directly the future headlines. You have other questions? I'm here and I'm open to answer.
I mean, I have one, but it's more in terms of the career path and how that ties in with, getting a PhD. So first of all, I would inquire about the motivation and then how that ties in with your work at the institute, because I think it's a very fine balance, and I would love to hear some experience.
Yeah, mostly the reason behind my decision to choose Diplomatic Institute was that I am able to pursue my research career. So I consider myself a researcher. I'm very passionate about doing research in political science and different IR topics. And also I choose Diplomatic Institute because it's quite friendly with the idea of pursuing a PhD program. Is our activity being a bit different than the one of the, let's say, proper Ministry of Foreign Affairs or the original MFA, let's say like this. We have a certain degree of freedom in terms of doing our research, also intellectual freedom. We have a freedom of choosing our methods, choosing our time, as far as we are not exceeding deadlines and so on. And also we have the possibility of continuing our studies. And I try to get or to research a topic uh, at the PhD program that is related to my daily activity. So I combine my previous research on Europeanization and democratization with my current position at the Diplomatic Institute, and I develop a project related to Europeanization through diplomatic practice, how diplomats are inspired by other diplomats and get knowledge and norms and values through their participation in different diplomatic trainings. So this is my experience and my, let's say, my small experience and career path for this moment of my 31 years old, let's say.
Great. Do we have any more questions for our guest? Did you enjoy tonight's workshop?
Yes.
What's one thing, if I were to ask you one thing that stayed with you after this workshop, one piece of information, what would that be?
The story of the guy who improved the relations between Germany and France. That was a nice one.
right?
I
Well-
really appreciate the information about the capacity of private individuals to affect international diplomacy.
Come on, I'm gonna stay in this call up until everybody answers this question.
For me, it's how broad and diverse diplomacy can look like. I mean, it reminds me of how medicine can take so many other forms. If you finish medical school, you can work in a pharmaceutical company, in absolutely everywhere, and such is the case with diplomacy as well.
Great.
Yeah, I really like the aspect that you described, Mihai, of diplomacy losing its purpose if it doesn't address or if it doesn't achieve this perception of actually having use in the population, which I consider really important. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Who else wants to share? I'm not gonna ask all of you if you don't want to say it, but if there is anyone else who wants to share, you're free to do so.
I'm very grateful for the recommendations you offered us, especially because in my case, I'm not coming from an academic background that would, necessarily teach these things to students like me. As I mentioned, I'm a psychology student, and I feel like all these steps I'm learning as I go. So I feel very lucky and thankful to be part of meetings like this and to actually listen to people that can give me some sort of tips and tricks to kind of get there, even though, as I said, I don't have the academic background in political science, law, whatever similar field.
Thank you for sharing. And you don't have to, we don't have to have the same background, because otherwise it would be very boring for all of us to know all the things and talk about the same things. So that's the beauty of it, right? To be so different. All right. Then, if no one else wants to add, I would like to once again thank our guest, Mihai Constantinescu, for taking the time on a Wednesday evening to share
Inviting
with
me.
us a bit about diplomacy. And I will share with you guys once again the assignment and Mihai's email address and also some links from the Romanian Diplomatic Institute. You can also follow them and get to know a bit more about their research and their activities. And yeah, thank you for joining and hope to see you all soon.